Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whichever way and place that you are. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you very much for accompanying us in this momentous day, this inaugural webinar on health and wealth in sports. We know that it's quite a few, and we got different times, so we're very sympathetic. We'll be very snappy. We have today 4 speakers and me, the 5th. Unfortunately, Vivian was unable to participate, but she will join us in the future when we have a webinar about global women's sports. Anyhow, I'm very pleased to present or introduce Alexandra Buthi from Switzerland. Alexandra, just very quickly, she spent 4 years in Melbourne studying the mad Australian football, where it's such a hard sport because you can get hit from anywhere. It's 360 degrees hits. You can't see where they're coming from. We also have Erica, who also knows about hits. Erica Mori from Italy. She has played for Italy. Is also involved with the Italian Federation. She has programs in education and motivation for young kids in terms of sports and life and social issues. We also have Dr. Juan Di Leo Rasuk from Argentina, someone that has played rugby. He's also a sports physician and traumatologist, and a person that understands a fair bit about biomechanics and all that it goes in the practice of sport. We also have from Australia, Edmund Sorich, who is in a very fascinating area of the engineering of genome in regards to concussion, dementia. Is quite an adventure, but I mean, for him and for me, thinking about what can be done, what can be modified, and there are so many. It's like a big tree with so many branches that of the things that could happen and what can be prevented. In my presentation, I just would like to say the reason for what we're doing is to look at the people and look at the business. Without business, we can't have sports and athletes. Without looking at the athletes, we can't have the business. So somehow, for the last 25, 30 years in rugby, it's been 25 years of professionalism. The money has increased exponentially, the speed of the game, the size of the players, but the prevention has not kept up with the advancement. So I personally have done work in terms of spinal injury prevention, mental health, bipolar, quadriplegia, preparation. I've seen it and I've been there, and this needs urgently to be investigated, researched, and implemented. So that is one of the reasons why we're here. And the case that now Alexandra is going to present is absolutely, I cannot stress enough, particularly when we have a history from American football that recently, or a few months ago, they had a huge compensation case for dementia, $2 billion. I'm sorry, Alexandra, don't want to get in there. I'll pass it on to you, and please entertain us with all your wonderful knowledge.
Thank you, Topo. So I'm going to start now. So just to introduce myself briefly, so my name is Alexandra. I work for Libra Law. It's a small law firm located in Lausanne, Switzerland, where more than 70 international sports federations are the headquarters. So it's a big market. We have the Olympic movement located based there. And we deal with international disputes in sports law and business law. We represent athletes, clubs, international federations, event organizers, before the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So I work for this law firm, mainly in English. And today I'm going to talk about my PhD dissertation, about my research. the title of my PhD dissertation is Concussion in Professional Team Sports, Time for Harmonized Approach. So my dissertation is based on case studies. It proposes a harmonized solution to better regulate concussion across countries and sports. And my approach is not sensational. I'm just trying to make things better, propose solutions, and hopefully collaborate with the sports industry. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm going to start with a medical overview of concussion. So there is no single precise definition of concussion. According to the Concussion in Sport group, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury induced by biomechanical forces. Regarding the symptoms, so you may or you may not have loss of consciousness, amnesia, headaches, blurred vision, slurred speech, irregular sleeping patterns, nausea, etc. And the diagnosis is quite tricky. MRIs are not helpful in this context. And we have many medical guidelines to diagnose concussion and no real consensus on which one is the best. There is no real treatment for concussion apart from rest. This is why it's very important to try to prevent concussion from happening. The long-term effects of concussion include memory loss, impulsive anger control problems, depression, disorientation, and even dementia, symptoms notably resulting in chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. One important thing about CTE, it can only be diagnosed with an autopsy. Other long-term effects of head injuries, Alzheimer's, ALS, and schizophrenia. Now, a geographical overview of the concussion controversy in professional team sports. There were many class actions filed during the past few years. Numerous sports governing bodies were sued in the US and Canada. This includes the National Football League, the National Hockey League, FIFA, USA Water Polo, and the Canadian Football League. And very recently, some class action lawsuits have been announced against Australian leagues and World Rugby, for World Rugby, so it's in the UK. With regard to CTE cases, so multiple CTE cases have now been diagnosed in team sports. This includes American football, Canadian football, Australian rules football, football, ice hockey, baseball, rugby union, and rugby league. This is my research question, the research question of my PhD. So how can we reduce or prevent, one, the public health risk of the occurrence of concussion, including its long-term effects to athletes, and two, how can we reduce or prevent the consequent legal risk that flow on to sports governing bodies? The originality of my research is that until now, people had only examined the issue, the concussion issue, within one sport, within one country. I come up with a harmonized solution. And it's the first time things have been put together and harmonized in a critical, analyzed in a critical way. My research is of great significance from health, social, economic viewpoints, not only for professional athletes, but also for grassroots sports and amateur athletes. The scope of my research, so I focus on professional team sports. This excludes elite sports, grassroots sports, and individual sports. I just wanted to be able to compare apples with apples. For instance, boxing, the main purpose is punching each other, so it was a bit tricky to make comparisons. My research is going to have an indirect effect on these fields, so it will be beneficial for grassroots sports, individual sports, elite sports, indirectly. This is the structure, content, and methodology of my research. So chapter 1, an introduction, chapter 2, medical overview, chapter 3, national case studies. So my case studies focus on the most relevant countries and sports. This includes the countries which are the most affected and the sports that are the most affected. It means the countries and sport which have a history of or potential for CTE and litigation. I focused mainly on North America. That's where the controversy is. So US and Canada. I also discuss Australia and a little bit Europe, so Switzerland and UK. Regarding South America, I don't talk about Argentina, but I have case studies about Brazil, because there is one official city case in Brazil in football. It's Hilderaldo Bellini, who played for the Brazilian national football team. In chapter 4, I identify general trends. In chapter 5, I propose harmonized reforms. So I use anti-doping as a guiding thread. And in chapter 6, so it's my conclusion. My methodology, I use mixed methods, doctrinal and comparative. So these are my main findings in overall terms. So the concussion controversy is expanding in terms of city cases, in terms of class action. The second finding, while sports governing bodies and to a lesser extent governments have recently made notable regulatory efforts, opportunities for further improvement still exist. So governments so far, they are poorly invested. They focus on grassroots sports and youth sports. They haven't done much at the professional level. And I really would like governments to step in, because it's a public health issue. And so I said there is opportunities for further improvement regarding the rules of play, rules of the game, concussion management protocols, education, research, data collection, financial support to injured athletes, for instance. The third main finding, current efforts are currently taking place within a framework that is too opaque, conflictive, defensive, and self-centered. So most of the time, sports federations, sports managers just didn't want to talk to me. And finally, harmonized collaborative reforms are urgently necessary, given the ongoing nature of the concussion controversy across countries and sports, and the need for sport to operate internationally. So these are my proposed reforms, harmonized reforms. So I use anti-doping as the main source of inspiration. Why? Because I think there are many similarities between anti-doping, the anti-doping system, and the regulation of concussion. The main similarity, in my opinion, is that there is a public health aspect. But I couldn't just use the anti-doping system as it is. It needed adjusting, of course, because there are also differences between anti-doping and the regulation of concussion. The main one, I would say, anti-doping is more about punishing. It has a disciplinary nature, whereas the regulation of concussion, it's more about prevention and compensation. I also used match fixing and spectator violence as a subsidiary source of inspiration. So my proposed reforms, the main feature of anti-doping, as you probably all know, so there is a World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, a World Anti-Doping Code, the WADA Code, a UNESCO Convention for governments, and the intervention of the Court of Arbitration for Sports. On this basis, I propose some reforms. So instead of WADA, we would have a World Sport Safety Agency, WASA, an international standard on concussion. So this standard could guide international sports federations and leagues, sports leagues, with regards to the rule of play, rules of the game, concussion management protocols, education, research, data collection, the financial support to injured athletes, etc. Then we would have, like in doping, a UNESCO convention, which would allow governments to step in. As I said, governments are poorly involved, and they could, for instance, like in doping, fund research and education. They could withhold the financial support from non-compliant sports organizations, or they could intervene with regard to workers' compensation. And the intervention of the Court of Arbitration for Sport, it shouldn't be compulsory, but it could be an option, a possibility. I don't want to make it mandatory. It would be too controversial, especially for sports leagues. So the benefits of my reforms, so we go back to my research question. This is how I solved my research question. My reforms would reduce the risk of immediate and long-term injury to professional athletes. They would reduce the risk of litigation. It will bring more transparency and collaboration between stakeholders. It will bring impetus and power of constraint from governments. And also they would have a positive effect on grassroots sports. So if you think about FIFA or World Rugby, if they change the rules of play, indirectly these changes are going to trickle down to lower leagues. And finally, my reforms would have a positive effects on individual sports or even other types of injuries to an extent that will need to be determined by further research. The main hurdles for my reforms, so funding, like for any large-scale project, funding may be an issue. Then we would have to convince sports governing body to surrender part of their authority. We would have to attract sports league and non-Olympic sports. So for the Olympic movement, I think it would be quite easy if the International Olympic Committee really wants to make these changes. So the IOC could tell international sports federation within the Olympic movement, if you don't do this, if you don't follow these rules, you don't take part in the Olympic Games. But the IOC doesn't have any authority over sports leagues, so it will be more difficult. And then the challenge of sustaining a strong effect, of course, we don't want window dressing. So if you would like to know more about my research, if you would like further information, so my PhD dissertation is available as a book, or should be very soon available as a book. You can already order it. You can find a summary of my main findings and proposal on Medium. It's a very short summary, a few pages. And also I put my contact details just in case you want to ask me some question. I would be very happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic, Alexandra, very professional, very thorough. We can align on very similar, all your systematology, all the methodology. The only differentiation is that you are concentrated in concussion and dementia, schizophrenia and all the rest. We are extending that to the spinal injuries, the depression, and also the other injuries that may happen for bad technique, bad attitude, or bad preparation. Let me support what you just said. 22 years ago, I worked as a director of SpineSafe Limited here in Australia. For 6 years, my job was to go and knock on the door of the rugby league, rugby union, and Aussie rules. They never opened the doors. They always had sufficiently covered. They never had any problems. Everything was under control. Now, only recently, Steve Thompson, the hooker of the English World Cup winning team, said, I cannot remember winning the Rugby World Cup. So from your information and what everybody knows, the need is there and has to be done urgently. Now, thank you once again for your time. We know that you have to go and attend the shop, so to speak. Otherwise, the bosses will not be happy with you. We are.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to attend the rest of the conference.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, we'll count with you. Now, we're moving on to Juan, whom I've known for several years. We discussed a fair bit about scrummaging and spinal injuries, and I won't spoil your story, Juan. I'll pass it on to you straight away, and you tell us about yourself.
Well, good morning, good evening. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Please feel free to write your questions. I'm going to basically focus on the injuries in sports. Most of the injuries are from repetitive trauma. They are accumulation of microtrauma. Even in sports like rugby, where you would think, well, that's typically traumatic or a hit. Not necessarily. Hits do happen, and sports have an inherent level of trauma, but for the most part, people get injured because they lack physical preparation. A few years back, in the US and Canada, there was a very good article on ice hockey players, and we wanted to investigate why they got injured. Well, there were several conclusions. One of them was that ice hockey is an aggressive sport. Thank you, doctor. But the one that came out that we didn't know was that people got injured because they were out of shape. And you might think, well, how can a professional athlete be out of shape? Well, when you play once a week, you have the time in the week to prepare yourself. But when you're traveling and playing 2 or 3 times a week, then all of a sudden, the day before the game, you're not going to train very hard. The day after the game, you're not going to train very hard. And people gradually, over a period of, say, 6 weeks in the playoffs, get deconditioned. So it ended up being that athletic trainers and physiotherapists like myself won games because we were able to present our first squad versus the second squad of the other team who was injured. Another issue that is very poorly managed is that when people think about sports, they assume professional sports. Well, that's 0.6% of the population. That is the extreme of the human genome. And nowadays, we have a huge athletic population that is not only not professional, but over 40. And nobody seems to pay a whole lot of attention to that area. Well, that's exaggerated. People do, but not as much. Because due to the longevity, sports and athletic activity has become a matter of public interest. It is a public policy so that people will be healthy. Otherwise, we're going to have a very aged population that's out of shape. The benefits of sports doesn't pay necessarily when you're 20 or 30, but it really pays when you're 40, 50, and 60. And now that we're living into our 90s, it is necessary that people continue with sports and that we manage the accumulation of microtrauma so that people on one side won't just quit and say, the heck with it, every time I do sports, I get injured. And on the other hand, that people won't carry with injuries that will demand them surgeries before time. The case in point has been American football. In professional American football, there has been a lot of replacements, new replacements at an early age. Now, with advancements in medicine and oats, we've been able to prolong those surgeries so that people will get the one and get it fixed, so they won't have it to be revised. Another issue on accumulation of microtrauma is that we can analyze it. It's similar in the biology part, but it's not the same in different sports. And that can be addressed. Biology is biology. You can't really jump it. You can't get over it. There are some publications and advancements in quantum biology, but the jury's still out. But if, say, Michael Jordan, who's about my age, myself, and Roger Federer sustain an injury, well, I'll get better if it's a musculoskeletal injury, muscle or tendon. I'll probably get better in 45 days. Michael Jordan, because he has blessed genes and he has trained for a very long time at a very high level, will probably get better in 42. And Roger Federer, because of the same things of Michael Jordan plus high metabolism, will get better in 40. But nobody is going to get better in 3. When people tell you that, they're lying. It's simply not true. And we must respect the times of healing and understand how to prevent it so that people don't get injured in the first place. The process of human metabolism don't change with altitude or color of skin or the technique of the day or the technique of the week. That sounds fun when you're cooking with friends, but when we're talking about science, it doesn't quite pan out. The prevention of injury also will give people the long-lasting physical activity so that people won't have a bad experience and decide to step out of it. We have an aging population. We've never dealt with this before. We've never dealt with having many years without wars. Typically, we engage 2 or 3 times a century in wars that kill a lot of people. And 100 years ago, the average lifespan was 50. Nowadays, we're pushing 90. So in only 100 days, medicine and health sciences have had to deal with a population that is not only aging, but who wants to be active. Most of the problems many times don't happen in sports. They are exposed by sports. Most of the problems happen because of static postures. During the Industrial Revolution, we wanted to not depend on or enhance manual work or labor to earn a living. So we moved from farms to offices. And now we get people who are 6 hours, 8 hours in the same position or at the same workstation, not really moving much. Then they go to sports and they say, well, I got injured when I did sports. Probably you got injured at work, but it was exposed when you moved. Now, you can't ask people to not sit, you can't ask people to not study, and you can't ask people to not work in an office when that's their job. But the idea is to complement this and understand it and understand how to prevent it in the first place so that the injury won't happen. Injury prevention is the best medicine, and exercise should be actually prescribed as a medical sort of treatment to improve the metabolic ones, which are the ones that are killing people today. The ones that are hurting society is not so much this coronavirus, but it is arterial hypertension, high cholesterol, and obesity. And especially with obesity comes acquired diabetes, which is a metabolic problem that could be prevented simply with exercise during the younger years. That's what I wanted to discuss.
Fantastic. Juan, look, we completely with you. And I would like to add a little metaphor. The point that we push in here is we would like to tell the world of sports that the preparation, so if we decide to go to the Mount Everest, we spend probably good 3 months training or 6 months training and preparing the backpack. We spend a fair bit of time for survival. Well, in sports, in a way, it is a form of survival. So when an athlete is 17, 18 years old and is about to undertake this wonderful career, is going to become a mega millionaire and all the rest, we need to force them and the parents to think about how are they going to retire, whether they have money or not, whether they have insurance or they have skills. Any young athlete should first look after the study, get a trade, secure something, because they don't know they might get injured, terminally injured in the first 6 months of their career, as it has happened. So before you start, think of the end. How am I going to retire? And how am I going to come back from the Everest?
Yeah. And in fact, speaking of Everest, most people in professional or high-level climbing don't get hurt or die going there. They get hurt or die coming back because they relax. They think it's over. No, it's not over until you're at base camp. Somebody asked about protocols for concussion. Yes, there are very many good protocols to evaluate a concussion. And you can, this is very well established, it's very well published and has been proven. But the idea is to prevent them in the first place. Will they happen? Yes, in sports, eventually they happen, but we want to minimize them. We want them to be a rarity. We don't want concussions or cervical injuries to be the norm. We certainly want to avoid them as much as possible. The goal is to eliminate them completely.
Great. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. You will get questions, I'm sure, from a number of guys. I saw that Alejandro Moreno from Italy. It's a number of people from Argentina also barracking for us, and but they're very keen to get informed. Other people from Europe, from Australia. So we have a very good spread of followers. Thank you, Juan, for being so supportive and understanding. And this is just the beginning. We got a lot of things that we can do. So thank you again. Now we're going to move on to Erica. Susanna, if we can get Erica to come and be visible.
I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Erica, our Italian flag bearer, I'll leave you to express yourself because you do that absolutely fantastically well.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. So
yes.
Have you global you. So not only you talk, but to everybody. I'm just posing a question to everybody who is present now to make just a reflection. One of my statements is that playing is thinking with your hand. You play a lot with your hand, but probably I'm not just referring only to rugby, but I'm referring to art craft. I'm referring to creating things. It's just the use of part of our body to learn. And this is part of my studies because the beginning is the rugby career. I had the honor of playing 2 World Cups and 7 European Cups, and to play 12 years for the national rugby team. And I played 21 years. So I'm just like a dinosaur of the women Italian rugby, but living many lives, I learned many things. And so this is the thing that I carry with me every time that I do something, like everybody. So we are just many parts that put together make a wonderful melting pot. But starting from my experience was the basic fact that women rugby was not professional at once. It's just beginning right now to be girls play for playing. So at the beginning, I was really hungry about it because I want to put all my energy in my sport to have the best performance. But getting old or getting wise, depending on how you want to define this growth, I understand that I was lucky because I had to study and I had to work at the same times while I was playing. So I trained in early morning, in late night, and during the day I studied and I worked. But this was a really luck for a certain way, not the sportive side, but for the experience side, because I understand that studying that I can bring a lot of contents in what was my sport. And so when I just changed the side of my life, the pitch, let's say, so when I stopped playing and I stopped at 40, so a quite not young age, I became a member of the board. I was elected as a member of the National Italian Board Federation, and I bring with me all my experience. And I always work in the marketing sector, and I had a transformation because I always use rugby in team building. So I was really often invited to be the expert of this team building in different companies. And I understand how I can just transmit my experience also in companies. But speaking about the side of the women rugby, when I was elected, I began to work to marketing projects that had to deal with social responsibility because I had an enlightenment, many enlightenment. I need enlightenment every day, but one of the most important that make me understand how I can use sport to transmit other concepts close to sport, but not strictly to the pitch. One of my projects is about, it's called Sport Inclusion in Motion, and it was about history. And I put together many different sectors that was art, history, and rugby. Was dedicated to children of around 12 who came from disadvantaged areas, just to understand how sport always spoke about also other things. And I start from the Roman period, from the Greek period, because probably a lot of you knows that the Olympic Games was created because there were wars in the Greek area. And so not to fight against each other, they create a sportive competition that were the Olympic Games. But on the side of the Olympic Games, there were arts. There were artists, there were singers, there were poets, there were painters, there were sculptors, because at that time there was not television and radio. So if you want to just to make everybody knows what was happening, and that happening was just the demonstration of how any country, because at the Greek period, the Olympic game was only played by Greek, but when they were adopted by Romans, all the people came from all different countries can play Olympic games. So the artists just sing and speak about the competition in reality between different countries. So the people just feel involved in supporting their heroes that represent the country. And so sport and arts always work together just to advertise each other in a certain sense. And so this illumination, like John Belushi, when just put on his knees, you know, in the Blues Brother and say, I see the light, and I see the light. I see how I can just take contents aside of the rugby and aside of sports. And so one of my many projects was about health, women health. And I created a tour that was called Women in Action, in which the rugby I just put together the information about ovarian cancer, because about prevention, this is the theme. About ovarian cancer, this was the specific project about. But fundamentally is the fact that we create in meetings in the different club of the women first division, just creating a moment in which oncologists and doctors came to the club and speak to the women of the club about prevention and about information, all the information that probably they were not comfortable to ask. So we go directly to the clubs and we ask the club to invite all the town. So rugby has point of meeting, of a transmission of information. And so these things just make people think that we are not just alone in our world, but we can share information, inviting the other to discover new paradigm. And so this connection that came from the pitch, but get to the normal life, was really important for me. And so I began always to work on this side of the sport. And this is the concept that I want to bring to this group of people, and just to think how life is not divided. We are osmotic. We just live our word in sports, but when the referee whistles, we just enter in our normal life. So we have to carry what we learn and share with the other ones. So I'm here for this, and the ISSF spoke about global sport. And so we can just use sport as a tool of transmitting information that is not strictly regarded to the body as sport contents and way of enjoying ourselves. So I'm really happy that we are creating and carrying this topic about sport and culture, because we don't speak about limbs, but we are speaking about what we can do, putting together body and contents, and just living our thinking that are separated area, and we can work every day to use sport as tool of information. Thank you.
Fantastic, Erika. Well done. I'm sure that everybody will clap from their place. I just like to support what you just said. I mean, we have from the Latin, mens sana in corpore sano, to start.
Yes.
So
exactly.
when the body is sane, the mind also. Another little point metaphorically, we can't go into playing a game of rugby and take our brain off and leave it on the side. So our brain goes with us. Our feelings go with it. So if we are suffering, the body, also our emotions, you know, our pride, we get tackled and injured, our pride also suffers. So we are a conjunction of all our parts. And as you say, you just said, not only the hands, not only the feet, but it's just the culture and everything else. Now, one other little point that I came to mind is neuroplasticity is one of, together with this immune system, are the two very important characteristics or skills of whatever we define it to, Now, the only way to improve neuroplasticity is by pushing it. So if we use our brain on the field, off the field, when we work and when we study, just using the brain auto-generates and re-energizes through the neuroplasticity, which is generating new circuits between all the millions neurons that we have. So we are a complete being. We cannot just push weights to increase our legs or to have a strong shoulder. We always have to have a holistic and pluralistic approach. Thank you again. And
it's a pleasure.
Keep working with us, because we are creating a very special place with room for thinking, for creativity, expression, and all the rest. Fantastic. Now, Edmund, I will just throw you into the pool. I met Ed some probably 6 or 8 months ago, and our conversation started from sports between tennis, rugby, and others. And soon enough, we found that many things that we had in common in regards of the injury prevention and all that goes with concussion dementia. Now, he's in a fascinating world, which is the manipulation or the engineering of the genome in order to have a diagnosis tool before the brain shrinks. And as we know, and I'll let Ed to explain, you can only diagnose this when the brain is on the table. So you need to die to know whether you have dementia or not. Anyhow, we know about the symptoms, but Ed, please take it over.
Thank you, Topo. Just working up, sharing my screen, so please excuse me while I just work through a couple of windows here.
Yep.
I'll also turn on my camera once I'm up on share also. It's loading up.
Yes.
And while this is happening, obviously, first and foremost, you know, it's a pleasure and an honour to be part of the ISSF. I think it's a great concept. This idea of this holism around sport and lifestyle certainly transcends, as has already been mentioned, you know, the physical space. We also need to think of the psychological and all the other benefits of sport. And here we are speaking about concussion. And we're noting, you know, the concussion is a problem. Well, let me say that not playing sport first and foremost is a much larger problem. So let's hope that let's hope that people don't get the wrong message and say that you know, concussion is outweighing sport. No. What the issue is that concussion, like any other injury, should be actually treated like any other injury, quantified, rest incorporated, and exercise prescription quickly part of this solution. So pardon me while I get this slideshow up. It doesn't seem to be working for me. Excuse me. What I might do, if that's okay, is it all right if I just go through the slides as they are? It's not on the full screen, but is that going to be okay?
Absolutely. Yep.
So please excuse me, but I'll work through this. I'll work through the slides. So thanks again, Topo. Me personally, I've played several sports at competitive level, certainly not elite level, but certainly a representative level. So I have a fair understanding of what sport entails. It's not just watching the sport from the couch and screaming at people. You know, I participated at many sports and had my own set of concussions at a time where, like, you know, most of the speakers here would have been at a time when concussion was just thought of as something that was in someone's mind, pardon the pun. Just get back on the field and keep going. We can't see anything. So on a personal note, also I'm a biochemist, so I have a scientific qualification. So come from the problem also as a scientist. And more broadly, I'm the director and co-founder of Glea Diagnostics. So Glea Diagnostics is a company that is validating biomarkers for concussion. not only for the diagnosis, but also the prognosis. But most excitingly, we're marrying that to a diabetes finger stick type of device. And the idea is that someone will be seen as having a concussion on the field. And rather than just going to the sideline and having a MACE test done as they currently do, they'll also couple that with our test. So within 15 minutes of actually collecting that sample, we'll be able to tell whether the patient is concussed or they're not, whether they go onto the field or whether they are removed from the field, number one. And then when they're recovering, if they are removed, when they should actually come back. Now, that is the golden egg. It's not really the diagnosis in a professional when you've got all these qualified practitioners around. Diagnosis really shouldn't be the issue. It's really determining when someone should return to play, return to work, return to school. And the evidence is now saying that 1 week is definitely not enough. We're thinking it's probably closer to 2, if not 3 weeks in most cases. So again, a little bit about concussion. I know it's been discussed previously, but the general statistics around concussion is that 80–90% of traumatic brain injuries, are mild. So most presentations are mild. You know, this idea that traumatic brain injury is a violent event causing lifetime ill, yes, it does exist, but that is in the minority of cases. Most presentations around traumatic brain injury are in fact concussion. And the bigger problem is that 15–20% of those concussions that are diagnosed, these are the ones that are diagnosed, so the ones we miss a hell of a lot, but the ones that are diagnosed, 15–20% will have continuing issues. These people that go on for months, for maybe years, and having issues for the rest of their lives, potentially. And we can see there's a cost from the CDC in the US. So, you know, a highly respected body claiming that or presenting the facts that $76.5 billion is direct and indirect cost of traumatic brain injury. And that was in 2010 in the US alone. So sports concussion, if I can go into the next slide. The current publicity is obviously around the NFL. Everyone knows or everyone's heard about the NFL. You know, they've set aside $2 billion to cover the costs of ex and current players. That was set only a couple of years ago, and lo and behold, that money's already gone. So this figure of $2 billion didn't service anybody. So you can see where the problem is with codes actually drawing the line in the sand and admitting there's a problem. Financially, it becomes a big issue. And hence we get that pushback. Certainly in smaller countries like Australia, where the codes just cannot even fathom that sort of figure. The interesting fact around concussion also is that, and it is the scary fact, is that 30% of concussions appear in a cohort of an age group between 5 and 19 years of age. And that's a scary fact. So 1 in 3 concussions actually happen in youth sports. So this is at the grassroots level. This is where there is no current screening method, or it's not a robust screening method. And I can speak from that personally. Having coached kids, I can also speak that as a audience member watching kids sport. It's quite scary. So actually, what happens on a Friday night on the football on the TV? Mums and dads then go see Johnny and Jenny playing football on a Saturday. They get a knock. If their star player could go back on the Friday night, then Johnny or Jenny can probably go back as well. I mean, this is a scary problem. And again, we have this protracted injury issue around chromatic dementia. CTE is one of the terms that people are now throwing out a lot, but it doesn't cover all dementias. So there are other dementias that actually are a part of this problem as well. Alzheimer's, early stage dementia, number of dementias outside of CTE which are proving to be a problem. So in Australia, just in the recent past, and a little bit on the international stage as well, you know, it covers everything from FIFA now saying that there's a problem with heading the ball. In the US, they've obviously mandated heading rules around kids. I think it's 12. Anyone below 12, it might even be higher, cannot head the ball anymore. a bit of a band-aid solution, because I mean, what makes the difference when a child does actually change age? They don't change very much physiologically, so they go from hitting the ball and to being exposed to hitting the ball. As was mentioned previously, it's all about preparation. So if the child doesn't know the technique, isn't learn the technique, everyone knows you learn a language better when you're in your, when you're younger than 10. It's the same with any other skill set. So if the child isn't exposed to heading, if the muscles in the neck aren't formed, then it's going to be a problem anyway. So I think that's a bit of a band-aid solution. And we know that heading is an important and a skillful part of the game. So I think they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in terms of that decision-making. And then we've got the cricketing guy locally. For those who don't know, cricket is such a big sport here, and it is in the UK, in India, in the subcontinent. We've got a player who's been concussed 7 times in the last 5 years. Now, people probably think from a civilian perspective, well, that's just over one concussion a year. That isn't a problem. But let me say, we all know now that serial concussion, it doesn't matter how frequently or how infrequently it does occur. If you have more than 3 concussions in a lifetime, you're probably set down the bad road. We also have problems in the rugby league, another prime case. And again, as alluded to previously, we had a class action with the AFL and a $1.4 million payout. But let me say, that wasn't paid out by the league. That was actually paid out by an insurance company, the player's own personal insurance company. So the issue with diagnosis is that we currently have a Glasgow Coma scale. That Glasgow Coma scale is a scale between 1 and 15. That's used on the SCAT protocol, which they use on the sideline. It's used in the MACE protocol in the military. The idea is someone gets knocked out. They have a series of questions, some dexterity, some balance tests. They go to the sideline. And then in an emergency department setting, Glasgow Coma is overlaid with imaging, and all imaging does is tell you if you've had a brain bleed or you haven't. It does not diagnose concussion. And as you can see there, the statistic of 37% accuracy in around the current diagnosis of concussion using those neurocognitive tests. We're one of the groups who are now looking at something a little bit more robust, and we are looking at biomarkers. Looking at something that's going to be specific for concussion. And people have been in this space for a long time now. The military, US military, spent billions, that's with a B, billions, trying to devise the technology. And in partnership with the US military and the local Australian military and a couple of sporting codes, we think we're pretty progressed in that space. Around treatment, again, it was alluded to earlier, blank slide. There really is no treatment. It's really around rest. Everyone's an individual. There is no blanket treatment for everybody. We're hoping that a biomarker will actually tell us not only if a person is concussed, but how badly they're concussed. Again, a prognostic type of tool. And everyone will be different. And up to 30%, as I alluded to before, will have a problem. So those 30% of treatment will not fit a diagnosis or a treatment, I should say, a treatment strategy, the same as someone who recovers in less of a period. So personally, Gloria has done a couple of clinical trials. We did one at the Alfred Hospital down here in Melbourne, the leading trauma hospital in Australia by quite a long way. And what we saw there was around presentations to an emergency department. The column on the left, the light blue column on both half of the screen, on both half of that table, pardon me, are the controls. And we can see there, when we measured our biomarkers, both the 1 and 2, we had a clear distinction between the normal presentation and what was deemed as either a mild TBI or moderate to severe TBI. So we could actually diagnose a patient quite readily using our blood test. As an extension to that, we tracked the patients over a 28-day period, and those that have a mild TBI, you can see there in the darker line, returned back to the healthy range, or what was deemed as the normal range before they were actually concussed, or compared to the normal population. And those, the moderate and severe, continue to have issues beyond that 28-day period. In a sports sense, we've done something similar with the US. We looked at a NFL and soccer college cohort. This was a cohort that hadn't reported any concussions for 3 months. They were enrolled in the study. We collected some blood. From that study, we saw that there was a group, and it turned out to be around 22% of that cohort did have some elevated biomarkers, our biomarkers. And when we actually look back retrospectively, the questionnaire they filled in when they had the bloods collected, those 22% of patients, believe it or not, had clinical symptoms. This idea of headache, a little bit of feeling out of your body, social skills a little bit off over the last couple of months. You know, there was this idea, we were confirming this idea that 22% of patients do have protracted issues. CTE we spoke about. Unfortunately, there's a lot of debate around CTE. I suppose that's because of the factors we alluded to again earlier. You need to cut someone's brain open before you can actually determine, and unfortunately that will only happen post-mortem. So what people are actually trying to do now is, rather than trying to find a biomarker for CTE, they're minimizing this idea or the exposure of serial concussion to actually get to this point. So that idea is that once you're diagnosed with a concussion, you actually treat that concussion, you recover from that concussion, then you go on and play whatever you were doing previously or in a work sense or whatever the case may be, rather than consistently hitting that muscle over and over again. You can think to yourself, with a cork thigh, you wouldn't be going back on the field if you had a cork thigh and get that cork again the next week. We spoke about the genome. There's two angles from the genome. Again, with this idea that 20% of participants or 20% of patients do have some protracted issues. People speak about apolipoprotein E4. If someone actually carries that they are more predisposed, first of all, to have the concussion. And as a second follow-up, they're probably going to be that group that's going to have the continued issues beyond the 3-week period. So there is some work around genome screening. There's other groups actually looking at biomarkers that cross over between Alzheimer's, concussion, hearing loss, vision impairment, all those things that people suffer when they have a concussion. And again, 1% of that population does have this variant. Very early days in terms of understanding genomes. We can measure more than we understand, but we are starting to see this idea that if you have a certain genetic makeup, you are more predisposed to actually having a concussion in the first instance. At the other end, TBI definitely is shown to be proving some neuroplasticity or changes, some gene changes, some regulation, post-injury. Again, we can't say that's everybody, but there is evidence that TBI does produce this inflammation, this inflammatory cascade. For all goodness about the inflammation, that it protects the injury initially. The problem is that it falls in on itself. So the more inflammation protection you have, the more overlaying of protein, the more Alzheimer's type of protein is laid down. There is definitely a genetic outcome post TBI. So where to next? In a nutshell, prevention is better than cure, as was mentioned before. There is no doubt that if we treat and we prepare the athlete appropriately, that the TBI will be minimised. Secondly, around the recovery, if the patient is in prime condition, if the appropriate muscle groups, including the neck, are exercised, we will have minimisation of concussion. And that's not just in football, that's in all sports. That's in all sports that have concussion exposure. Jockeys, ice hockey, you name it, the neck is critical. We're looking at biomarkers, which we're working on. We think we're pretty well advanced in that space. Hopefully, again, this point of care, the blood test is only as good as actually the application of the test. So rather than letting Johnny or Jenny go home after a football game, the coach or the physio of the team actually does a test in the sheds or on the sideline, tells Johnny or Jenny or tell their parents to actually go to the doctor the next day and actually have that process, that triage process instigated. Optimised return to play, as we said before, that's the golden egg. When should Johnny or Jenny actually go back on the field? Tomorrow or in 3 months' time. In a grander scale, more in a in a legal space, we're also looking at introducing mandatory baseline testing. Medico-legal becomes an issue that we need to talk about as well. And the big one is really insurance. The insurance companies need to actually buy into this space. Leagues need to be forced by their insurance companies to actually provide some form of cover for every player that actually signs on to any level of sport. There are my references, there are my contact details. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Again, if there's any questions, if we don't answer them tonight, please feel free to email me at any time, and I'll certainly get back to you. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful, Edmund. Very much appreciate it. It's a wonderful world that you take us in with your hand. Just a couple of things that I now will become the devil's advocate, if in the sense that you, the technicians, you talk about concussion, then Erica talked about the use of the brain and the creativity, and also we got the law. And it's unfortunate that Vivian O'Keefe couldn't participate, because I want to touch briefly that the problem is, sport is played by men or by people, and people are the problem, not the sport. And the sport needs modification in many areas. But what comes in play, since sport became such a big business, when it got bigger, professional, and all the rest, because the people that get invited or were called up to run this are business people, and they think that they trading with gold, they trading with human, they're not trading shares or horses. So when they are dealing with a balance sheet where they put income versus expenditure, and the players are just performing assets. So they don't want to see anyone being 3 or 6 months or 12 months on the bench or in the hospital or recovering. So they must do, which is resting, recovering, and training and whatnot. They don't want to. They just want. I've seen this in my time, where the coach or coaches would talk to the physiotherapist. They said, no, we need 10 days to recover from this injury. No, I need him for Saturday. He's the best kicker, or he's the best tackler, or the best prop. Well, I play myself in that sort of situation. I have concussion, so I know. But here, the crux of the whole thing comes down to 2 or 3 words. One is responsibility for your own actions, from the attitude and the ethical point of view. If you really are professional, you do things professionally and ethically and adjust it to the social norms. But here, greed comes ahead of responsibility, and then the wrong attitude is governing just about everything. The coach, we know in rugby, coaches have taught props how to collapse the scrum. And immediately, when you have a second rower that is witnessing this, is an accomplice. And the back row also, and the reserve grade. Everybody knows that this is done because they want to win. The magic word is win, because winning brings money through the till. So again, greed, and this is what we need to get the education and the awareness is, yes, the business is important, but so is the human resources. We need to find the balance. And Alexandra is right on the point with this harmonization, bringing the law, the insurance companies, and the doctors, and the trainers, and everybody else. The television, we haven't even mentioned television. Well, television is the one that pushes, because ultimately they make the big bucks. So they tell this sport, do this, play at this time, use that ball or not. So I don't want to carry on. As you can see, when I get started, I can keep going for a long time. Your presentation, Ed, has been enlightening, alarming, food for thought, but above all that, food for action. We want to do action. It's too late for talk. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, thank you for the thank you for the opportunity. I think just very quickly, you know, now that we have tools to actually measure TBI, this idea that, you know, it's all in the head, pardon the pun, those days are gone. Everyone knows the knee reconstruction is 12 months. You can go to a coffee meeting, you can go to anywhere. Everyone knows 12 months is the norm. So we're just going to quantify the injury and we're going to say, you know what, in most instances, the play is going to be good to go in a couple of weeks. It's not the end of the world, but in some instances, it's going to be a little bit longer.
Excellent. Susanna, can you hear me?
I hear you very well. Thank you, everybody. I thought that was really interesting. And we have a few questions if you want to go through quickly. And if everybody could turn on their cameras, that would be good. I'll open the questions to the floor. And please, you know, let me know who wants to answer, and we'll just, you know, pick an answer, or you know, more than one. Christian here is asking, in your opinion, how much impact does the sport field quality have on sports injuries? For example, is there a relation between concussion and field hardness? Whoever wants to take that one.
I can start very quickly on that. It's a good question. I suppose that comes from the fact that, you know, American sports in particular are played on synthetic surfaces. They've changed a hell of a lot. So synthetic surfaces now are probably just, it may be even safer than some turf surfaces, to be sincerely honest. But the overall answer to that is don't know. More so the fact, I don't think we'll ever know, to be sincerely honest. The level of force does not mean the level of injury ultimately.
I would like to add that I tend to look at it from the before the hit or before the compromising situation. So the actual preparation, the strength and the flexibility of the body, preparing all the muscles with strength and flexibility again, is the only defense you have for all your joints, includes the neck and in general. So if you're going to, in a contact situation, there is no replacement, first with a good attitude, so you don't go to destroy the other person. So that is very important, but also the preparation and the technique. Now, when you fatigue, technique is the first thing that suffers. So again, back to the preparation. So there are a number of, this is a matrix that has got at least 10 things that will aggravate or contribute. And one of them is nutrition. The other one is resting. Because if you have a player that hasn't slept well the night before, all of a sudden his or her level of attention will be compromised. So there, you've got to look at holistically and pluralistically. Otherwise, you can go and make an assumption, and that may be only half of the answer.
Excellent. Okay, I have a question here for Alexandra. What reforms came about from all your research? Are there major tools on the sport company side to follow up on the injury rate?
Okay, so my PhD is really new, so my book is about to be published. I haven't really released my proposed reforms. So now I'm trying to make contact with the sports industry, and hopefully they are going to collaborate with me. But, you know, like publishing a book, it takes a lot of time. There is a peer review process and everything. So it's a bit frustrating because I really would like to make a difference now. But since I started my PhD, I must say that some of my reforms have already been implemented. So some of my suggestions, for instance, I suggested to have a concussion substitute in football. So while a player in football is being assessed for concussion, so it can be replaced temporarily or permanently. Or in Australian rules football, they announced this a few days ago, I think 2 days ago. There will be 11 days. It will be compulsory. If a player is concussed, he won't be able to play the next game. So that was one of my suggestions. There are many others. hopefully that will be implemented and that are possible. And regarding how to follow up the injury rate, yes, it's possible. So it's about data collection. Many sports leagues and international federations have this system. They have injury reports. Unfortunately, they are not harmonized, not always harmonized. So even the definition of concussion is not always harmonized. So it's difficult to make comparison. And also many of these reports are not published. So sports governing bodies are quite wary about this. They are trying to cover up the problems. So yeah, more transparency would be needed if we want to progress.
Wonderful.
Alexandra, I'd like to add to that. We are here because we believe in the sports sciences, but also in the human attitude, as just touched before. While we're waiting for the results, that goes not just for, goes for everybody else. While we're waiting for the data, the statistics to come up and all the rest, there is nothing that stops us from preventing the bad attitude. So the coaches and players and physios and doctors must not wait, but just take the prevention, do the right thing, not do the wrong thing and see how much you can get away with. So again, is the responsibility for doing the things right. I put an example. When I started playing rugby at 19, I didn't have any idea of the rules. So it was impossible for me to grab the book and understand everything because they are very complex and complicated. So all I did is I got a very quick crash course on what not to do. So I was taught, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. So really, with about 5% of the book, I started playing, I continued playing. And I continue all my career, 22 years, and I can tell you, I couldn't tell you the rules. Some I do, but my preoccupation was do the right thing, prevent and prepare. Now, a little metaphor. When we go to a car, we're going to drive a car, we wear a seatbelt because it's been proven that is the best form of prevention. I mean, you could kill yourself, but using the seatbelt, okay. Now, if we go to rugby in the scrum, having the back straight and the legs bent and really strong grip with the other players, all these are things that have been spoken about for 50 years. But the clever people that want to invent something new or do it differently, then everybody wants to invent something. And well, we got a mess. In many sports, we don't have, so this is an abuse. Again, the attitude and the responsibility has faded away. Over to you, Susanna.
Okay, well, we are running out of time and some of our audience have to leave. So I want to just, wrap up with one last question, and we have a few others, but please, I mean, for the audience, we can contact, you and, put you in connection with any of the speakers. How does stress on one side and values and family support on the other side after recovery? But also, how do these affect prevention?
No. I'll take that one.
Okay.
It does. It does because we use the biopsychosocial model. Many times when we're dealing with kids, like it was so well expressed by Edmund, we have a problem not with the kid, we have a problem with the parents. The parents want the new Michael Jordan, the new Leo Messi, the new anyone you want to talk about, and the kid may not want that. People interpret things the way they want to many times, and they think, oh, it's not so bad. Well, you don't know. And that's when we get into problems, particularly with the adolescent population, because parents obviously have a word to say about their children. They shouldn't. They should be quiet, because all they do is embarrass the kid in front of their friends and make them feel insecure and push them perhaps to a place where they shouldn't go. It's what we've been talking about, prevention. It's when in doubt, we don't make the same proposition to a professional athlete at the World Championship than we do to a 15-year-old kid. But at times, and especially in the US, parents get over fanatical about their children, and that's why many kids end up leaving sports, because they hate it, because they have horrible experience by being yelled at and pushed at places where they didn't want to go. So certainly family values and the interpretation of the injury, for better or for worse, has weight. Perception is not as big as reality. It's bigger. Whether right or wrong, if you think you're very, very injured, you're going to be fearful. And if you think you're perfectly fine, even if you're not, you may end up going back to the field too soon, and it ends up in problems. Richard Feynman taught us very well, the experiment never fails. If you do things right and they turn out right, that's expectable. If you do them wrong, you should expect them to come out wrong.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
If I may take this up, I really would like to thank you and the British Argentine Chamber of Commerce. And there are a number of other people that have been holding my hand. My daughter Victoria, Victoria Rodriguez, Ignacio Rodriguez, Marion Bell from the Project Management International. There are a number of people that are contributing, and very simply because this is not funded. I guess I'm the biggest funder on this point in my time as a crazy philanthropist, and as a not-for-profit, we rely on the contribution of a lot of people, time and effort and whatnot, and it's happening, and it will get even better. So to all of those that I have not mentioned, but we will discuss things, and I will happy to receive the questions and the conversations. So I'm absolutely ecstatic, thankful, proud. I cannot tell you the positivity. I want to fly.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. And just remember, this is the first edition of a series for 2021 on sports. So join us in March. We're going to discuss women's sports. And if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, and if you have supporters who can help us, definitely count on us to just, promote and assist. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day. And thank you all for coming. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Susan.